It's like me.
And I did actually do a PowerPoint presentation, which I haven't done in quite a while, so I've got some back and forth, but I wanted to show a couple of visuals. This Sunday I went out to the discharge pipe and I took some pictures. I have a video that you'll see in a little bit. Just to show you what, it's running clear, which is a huge increase. I think, Claire, you were out there and might have seen it look a little different. So that's good news. I mean, honestly, I think the overarching is I think we've turned a corner. I will say that one thing I did yesterday is I went through all of the odor complaints. And so I'll start out just to reiterate once again, I totally appreciate the fact that many of you have been dealing with nasty smells, and especially last summer. And best I can do is apologize and say that our job is to make sure that you don't have to go through that again. I do think, from what I've seen, that we have also turned a corner on that. But again, proof will be in the pudding. And so hopefully we can hang on to that. I intended to do a timeline of those. We would get an odor complaint, we would look into it, we would find something, we'd fix it, and think that's it. We'd get more odor complaints, we would look into it, we'd find something else, we would fix it. We had more odor complaints, we found something else. And it's obviously disappointing on our side because each time we thought we had fixed the problem. On your side, it probably just felt like, well, we're complaining and it keeps going. So at some point I will put together a timeline, just for the record, of the odor complaints that we received, what we found, what we fixed. And what we've discovered is it's really a combination of things. It's a combination of construction problems, of some design issues, and some maintenance issues. And it was just a combination of everything that all, unfortunately, happened together. So, as I say, we're not there yet, but we are significantly better than the first time we met. Back on April 4th, I think it was, which is only 2 months ago. Feels like a long time ago. So I just wanted to go through the things that happened in May. It was a busy month. So we start out with the UV systems. That's the ultraviolet light system. That's the last piece of the process where the wastewater gets disinfected. And so both of the systems were repaired on May 13th, back in full operation. Obviously, the old plant wasn't operating at that point, but the UVs were operational. And the chlorine treatment that had been being used to ensure disinfection was discontinued as of May 14th. The old plant. So valves were replaced, sand filters were repaired, other repairs were made the week of May 12th. Now part of that week was, in order to do those repairs, the valves were actually in the tank. So we had to empty the tanks so that, it was actually Jake who ended up going into the tank to do the valve replacement. And the tanks were bigger than we expected. This plant was constructed in 2006. We had the plans, but they were bigger than we thought, so it took a long time. I think, Ron, you certainly experienced the midnight trucks coming in. That was the last gasp of needing the big, huge trucks to take the final amount out, thousands of gallons of liquid, so that the replacements could be made. So that was a unique week that we hope never to have to do again, frankly. So the old plant was back in operation as of 5/19. The way the plant works is I guess it's called influent, so the discharge from, and the old plant services the Red Hook Commons apartment complexes. So the waste comes into the plant, the tanks need to fill, and then when they're filled is when it starts to discharge. So it took about a week to get to that place to actually have discharge coming out of the plant. Lab testing samples restarted from the old plant last week, and the initial results are actually in compliance. I have a chart on the lab testing that I'll show you in a bit. Micrological bugs that Robert has talked about are growing steady. What's our latest?
On the old side, there's 710 today.
Okay, so if you remember, I think our target is 2,000.
Yeah.
And for the new plant, at one point we were at 700, then we were at 1,500, and
Now we're at 2,700.
and now we're at 2,700. So we have, now the fun part is finding that right balance. The initial target was 2,000, now it's figure out what's the final refinement, I guess, of what's the right level.
Can you have too many plugs?
Yes.
Oh, you can, okay.
So yes, the sludge management is a big part of operating a wastewater plant.
Okay.
So when we get to a certain point, we have some extra bugs. If you'd like to buy some, we'll let you know. So for the new plant, a couple of things happened. Pure Stream is the manufacturer of the plant system. They came out to discuss with our team and review our operations. The weirs are, there are two sides to the plant, and the flow is supposed to go evenly between them, and the weirs are the thing over which they go. Please use the technical terms when I get it wrong. And the ones that we have, they were adjusted, but they're not exactly at 50-50 because one of them, I think, is bent, and so those are going to be replaced. According to Jake, it's not that's not as big a repair as the ones we did at the old plant. And then the blowers blow air into the system, and they just need to be optimized. And then we have temporary pumps in the equalization tank. I don't remember if no, I didn't. What we're finding with the new plant is the way it operates best is slow and steady all the time. And so the equalization tank allows us to collect the wastewater and then flow it into the plant slow and steady. And that's been part of the process, is to figure out what is that right point over which the plant isn't happy. And so, again, using all my technical terms. And so that's been part of the process, is to figure that out. So slow and steady is definitely the best for the plant. And so the pumps in the equalization tank, the goal there is to make sure that those pumps make it always slow and steady. I don't think I mentioned this on an actual slide, but one of the things that we will need to do in the future is to add to our expansion tank. We've determined that we don't have enough capacity in the equalization tank to handle all that we would like for.
Is that true for the 50,000 gallon capacity, or is that looking forward to like phase 2?
The new plant is the 50,000 gallon tank, so it's for that one. So
okay.
The capacity is there. It's just when there are the ebbs and flows, that really needs to be captured in the equalization tank and not in the plant.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that is for the sand filters, for example, the sand, sort of going through the sand, as you might think about it, if there are any particles, they get captured in the sand. That's kind of the point. And so the sand needs to be washed, and it's referred to as backwash?
Backwash. Yeah.
And so there's a process to run water through it to clean the sand, and then when that's run through, it goes back to the plant. So one of the adjustments, I believe, was instead of going back to the plant, it goes back to the equalization tank. And so that was one of the adjustments that was made. Lab testing. We've been testing weekly since April 9th, sorry. Weekly testing continues for now, as I just mentioned, so let me switch to one of the things that I think has troubled many of us is what did we miss? And so I went back to, the village took over the plant in the very end of December 2020, so we really the village started operating in 2021. So I went back to the reports. Back then it was just the old plant, and the requirement was to test quarterly. And on the left you'll see that those are the parameters from our Speedies permit that we are required to test and be within certain limits. I used green because that felt like a positive color. So in all of 2021, every item was in compliance. If you look in 2022, you get through to November, we have one item that's in non-compliance in March, one in July. And the lighter yellow is it's close, 5.7 versus 5. And the 1.8, that's actually in compliance because the ammonia, it's 0.98 up through the end of May, And then, so June 1 through October 31st is the 1.81. And Robert will have to explain why that's different.
Could I also just ask quickly, what is the source of this information? Was this from the prior sewer operator, or did this come directly from the lab?
This is lab reports.
Directly from the lab
From
reports?
from lab reports, yep.
Okay.
And then 2023, I will fill in April 2023. Just didn't find it in going through this. Some of these numbers come from different, one is from the lab report and the other is from a different report, so they're the dailies.
What is the other report?
They're daily, we do daily tests, and so there's a report that lists out all the results of the daily test.
And those results are managed by the previous sewer operator?
That would have been part of his overall responsibility, but we had one of his employees who was our main daily operator, so he would have been the one who would have done that. If you're asking about the question of certification, he was in full
It's not about
compliance.
certification, it's, it has to do with the issue of the operator not actually being certified for a full year and having forged documents. And so just making sure who is in charge, like who touched those documents.
So the person who did the daily items in the time frame that you're referring to was a different person who had his full certification for the 2A plant that we are.
That was Brian Smith.
Yes. Okay, so that's 2023. So if you look at that, there's one spot in 2023 where we are, or actually we're actually in compliance there. Again, because the ammonia is, the target changes between the two halves of the year. And I really, part of why I'm showing you this is, and it was really as much for my own benefit as anything, was to look back and see what did we miss. And, you know, in March, we obviously had an issue. January 2023 up through June of 2024, we were only required to take samples from the discharge, which combined both plants. As of July 2024, they wanted separate samples from each plant, which is, you'll see that's when the numbers start to change. They're just different between the two. And so the latter half of 2024, we were out of compliance in September and in November and December. And I will say, having gone through the odor complaints, they started a new wave of odor complaints came in the end of November, beginning of December, and that's really what triggered us to ask Delaware to go look and see if they could help, and led to a full audit from Delaware Engineering, which led to a focus. We did an RFP, and then we changed operators. And there was improvement in February, and then it all fell off a cliff again in March. And a lot of yellow. Now, the other thing just to know is in April is when we started doing weekly. So you have 4 columns for April and 4 columns for May. And in May, we don't have the full results yet. So we only have some. And the old plant was taken offline for 2 months. And I just wanted to share, going back to the initial look of, this was a report. This was a report, no, it's not going to show it there. We got a listing of all the violations from the DEC from February 2023 through, I think it was March of 2025. And so I reordered them based on the type of violation. And the ones in the light yellow, what you see there is flow in conduit or through treatment plant. And the limit value is 0.025, which is the level of the old plant. And so when the new plant went online, for which we had an approved Speedies permit, that should have been 0.075. And if it were properly listed on the limit value, we would have had no violations in that whole time. Otherwise, you look at it and you think we've been in violation since the new plant began. And then below, you start to see July 2023, January 2024, March 2024, and then nothing again until November of 2024. It just starts to separate it out from the top piece is not any kind of toxic discharge. It's just a miscalculation of what we should have been or were allowed to discharge.
With the limits, so I understand one tank's the 25, one's the 50, and combined is the 75.
Yep.
But if the 25 one happens to go above its value, does that trigger a problem? Or it's okay if that one's overflowing as long as it's overflowing under 75?
So everything out of the plants goes through the pipes and discharges out of the one combined discharge pipe. So if the old plant, and you might need to help me out on that, if it's flowing 50,000 through it, there's all manner of problems because it can't handle that. So
Right.
the other parameters are going to be off. They're going to be out of compliance because the plant can't handle that. But the specific quantity that's going through, actually I don't know. Do you know? Do they check both?
You have a monthly average, right? So if the monthly average exceeds 25,000, then it would be a violation.
So there you go. So yes, it would be a violation.
And did it ever exceed 25?
The old plant?
The old
No.
plant?
Mm-mm. On average, it's between 8 and 12. It's not fully utilized. So the old plant, I can't imagine it's ever been over, because it was not designed for the new plant to flow to the old plant. The old plant can flow to the new, but not the new can't flow to the old.
Wasn't the new one offline for a little bit, or was that the old one?
That was the old one.
That was just the old one.
Yeah, just the old one.
The old one also had problems with its sand filtration, right? Like documented issues from the beginning. Is that the one that had the problems, or was it the new one that had the repair needs from
So
the start?
the old one had some repairs that were needed to the sand filters,
Yeah.
and also when we had not done a replacement of the sand filter, the sand itself, the sand medium. I don't know if we have the records of whether or not it was done before we took over the plant.
Well, the monthly operator reports, like pretty much from the beginning, said that the old plant needed new sand filtration systems addressed, like monthly, and it was never done. Why did it get pushed off? Because then, in like the January report, I think it said that it'll be done during the expansion phase. So was it an issue of like money, or what was
So the plan was, when the new plant started up, we were going to divert the flow from the old plant to the new plant, which would then give, like we just did, would give us the opportunity to do the repairs, and the sand filter was one. Having asked multiple times the prior operator when he was ready to do that, I never got a time when he was ready to do that.
So you had approved it and approved the funds, and it was on him to do it? Because the reports look like he was saying this needs to get done, but he can't do it without the funds to get the parts, right?
It's probably not a complete representation of the conversations that we had. Part of it would have been on him to give us an estimate of what it would cost. I don't recall that we ever got an estimate of cost. Actually, that's not true. The idea was, the plan was, going back a couple of years, the plan was to divert the flow from the old plant to the new plant when it was up and running, so that an inspection could be made of the sand filters. He actually had given us an estimate, but that was for completely redoing the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And actually Delaware at the time didn't, I think it was Delaware, it was either Delaware or CT Mal, I don't remember anymore, indicated that there might, no, I think it was Delaware, indicated that it might just need to be refurbished, if you will, that we might have been able to do it for a whole lot less money. But that would have required an inspection, and that inspection was supposed to happen when the new plant started up, and it never did.
So when the new plant started up, though, the reports continued to say that it needed to be fixed.
And what you're finding is the report tended to leave the same things on for month after month.
So his reports weren't accurate.
Well, the sand filters didn't get fixed, so that was accurate.
There's also reportedly no issues with discharge limit, right?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So at that point, it needed to be addressed and reviewed, but it was not leading to non-compliance of the outflow.
But it just sounds like, so it was still sort of left hanging out there for a few years until, like now that it's fixed?
That would fit the facts, wouldn't it? Okay.
As we discussed in the meeting that you had with the coalition leadership, the chart of the discharge is very helpful and, and the piece that is missing is the timeline of the odor complaints because that is a layer. And so just for folks here, not on that spreadsheet, not on that spreadsheet is the years of folks writing in about the odor complaints. So there are multiple issues. Odor was one of them. You mentioned at the beginning that the issues was a combination of design, construction, and maintenance. That hits all the buckets.
Mm-hmm.
Curious on the design front, that's been addressed. Those are things like the equalization pump size, stuff like that. Okay, so those are great.
Yeah, and the other was in the equalization tank. The odor control was a very small charcoal filter. And that clearly wasn't enough, because that was the last thing that we adjusted, is the vapor from the air from the equalization tank was connected to the bigger odor control, and that was done in March of this year, end of March. And I think that was sort of the final thing that seems to have mitigated any consistent odor issues.
And that would have made sense if there was large volumes of stuff going through the equalization tank.
Yep. And just to clarify, in going through, and again, I want to clarify that I've got all my information right. The first, I remember doing a newsletter, probably in February, talking about the sewer plant. And Kat, you wrote in and said, what's that going to do odor-wise? And then in October of 2023, we had an odor complaint from 5 Kent. And then in December of 2023, Kelsa indicated a significant issue, and then we fixed something, and that seemed to work for a little while. And then in April we got, and now some of that is in the winter, folks keep their windows closed and they're not outside as much. So these are just obviously when people are outside and sent in there. Not to say there weren't other issues. Early April 2024, there was smells from 5 Kent called in. June 2024, Laura Lane actually called in, and that's when we discovered that the odor control system was not installed correctly. And we made that, we installed it correctly in July. So that was certainly a big one. Anyway, I will definitely write this up as a timeline, because I think it's important. All right, so that's that. I did want to go through a couple of other items that have come up, financials. There's been a question about transfers from the water fund to the sewer fund. I know that there's information from the Office of the State Controller's Office that says you can't do that. However, there is a legal basis that's based on legal decisions that have been made that our attorney has forwarded to our accountant, and reviewing with the attorney and the accountant, because while there are basic laws, there are also interpretations that get to be added. So I don't have a final clear answer, and so when I get one, I will definitely share.
When you, could you just go back? It says review with attorney and accountants in consultation with OSC. So
Sure.
Are you already in touch with the OSC for?
So I'm not an accountant, so I can call. I've read what you sent me. They're not going to tell me anything else that I don't already know there, and I'm not an accountant. So I would rather have the auditor that we've hired to audit our financials talk to the State Controller's Office, because they will understand and they will actually have a real conversation and come to a conclusion.
Are they already in touch with the contact I gave you?
I don't know. I mean, I've been in touch with our accountant, I've asked them to follow up, and I haven't heard back.
I mean, it seems like it would make sense for you to be on a call with the accountant for the contact, just, you know, to get a quicker answer, if possible. I think that contact I gave, I don't want to share the name out, but
I get it, I have it. You know, we could have that call today. All the implications in either direction are not something that we're going to resolve right now. I don't think there's anything urgent. I understand your concern and your frustration. I've had a few other things that I'm working on, and this one didn't hit the highest priority. So I apologize. If they've been in touch, they've been in touch. If they haven't, they will be. So again, if we have been inappropriately transferring sewer funds from before I was mayor, there will be that will have to be addressed, and it's not a quick answer.
But this wasn't from before you were mayor, this was from like the last
Sure it
few
was.
years. So you're saying this has gone on prior, like more than the last 3 years? Because the sewer didn't exist, like the village
When
didn't.
we took over the old plant, we became sewer operators, and that happened before I became mayor.
I see, so that has been happening since 2019?
Our budget and financials are on the website. You're welcome to go back and check.
But you're saying that it has been going on since before?
Yep.
Without those transfers, can the village fiscally run and maintain the,
So when we took over the Red Hook Commons wastewater treatment plant, the contribution from Red Hook Commons would not have covered the cost of running even a smaller plant. That's why there has to be some justification for why the village chose to do that at the time, which is why I'm not the right person to answer that question. I know there's also a concern about the wetlands, and I know some of you know this very well and others know it less well, so I just wanted to give a little bit of background. It appears, I wasn't sure if Kirk's was unique to us or was a DEC name, but apparently it's unique to us. There's a property that was approximately 20 acres. It includes where Red Hook Commons is, because the parcel that we have is I think 10.2 acres. It was a frozen food processing and apple processing facility. Actually, there was apple processing and a apple orchard in the 40s. And then it was frozen food processing. I always heard it was a pie plant, but it turns out it was a meat pie plant, which is a little less exciting from my standpoint. It was determined, so an environmental restoration record of decision for the site was issued in February 2005. My understanding is what that means is it was considered to be a site that needed remediation. A $1.7 million cleanup project was completed in 2006. And it was tank removal and soil evacuation. And a portion of the property was put under environmental easement, which is monitored by DEC. The primary portion of that is the wetlands. From the report, the cleanup report, they did find, I believe it was arsenic that was above guidance levels. And so that's why it's under a conservation or an environmental easement, and DEC monitors it. And the owner of the property, which is now us, has to send in a report every 5 years. And based on a number of concerns from residents reaching out to DEC, and frankly, I'm grateful that you did that. That was the right place. They actually sent out a staff from the Division of Environmental Remediation, and they made a site visit on May 15th. And they sent a response, and they shared that response, and I made a bunch of copies, so you're welcome to, and they reviewed all the various different questions that came up, and they shared. Now, just to be clear, the environmental easement is uniquely on the village property, so it doesn't go beyond that, but that was obviously determined to be the area that was considered necessary to clean up. And then the sewer expansion, I know there's a lot of concern about that, and I would certainly reiterate, if we can't figure out how to run the plant we have, we certainly shouldn't be expanding it. But I think, as I've said before, that's not an option. We have to run this plant properly, and we will. We will do what it takes, and we will get to proper compliance. We've made improvements, but we're not there yet. So I have received several requests to rescind the negative declaration for the environmental assessment form. The village reviewed that and approved the negative declaration last July. That was done in conjunction with our land use attorney, Victoria Polidoro, and our engineers, Delaware Engineering. I have reviewed it myself. I have reviewed it with our land use attorney. I did that yesterday, and I have forwarded the concerns to our engineer, and I've asked them to review it again and send me their response as well. So as soon as we have that together, we'll certainly share that with you. I'll just reiterate, I know there's some environmental questions there, but also the idea behind that review is for a future project, and it obviously assumes that we are properly operating the plant. If we're not, then that's a different issue, if you will.
What's the metric for determining that you will be properly operating the plant, of length of time?
So
Because if you run
obviously
it
we need to be in compliance.
Right,
For
but if
how
it
long?
fails out of compliance, will you say, oh, we can't run it, we're giving up? Or will you say, no, we're gonna try again to fix it like we're doing now?
So I think as there's an art and a science to running, as I'm learning, running a sewer plant. And there's no reason why we can't properly operate the plant. There is a reason why there may be a blip here and there. We may well have an item that's out of compliance one month, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to properly operate the plant. And if you think about it, we've got 125, Jack, you probably know this number. How many properties do we have in our new sewer district? Oh, maybe Claire knows. Anyway, we have over 100 properties that are attached to the sewer. So if we just said, okay, we're out of this business, where's it gonna go? So
then
Well, it could
your
be managed
statement,
by the
we're in the
county.
business.
Someone else
We
could do it.
would be in no position to be expanding if we're not operating it properly.
So,
If the budget thing is found to be a valid thing based on those findings, then that means this thing has been in the deficit for years, and is continuing to be based on the budget next year. So how is that going to get covered if it can't be borrowed from water anymore?
That's a problem that I will address when we've completed the review and determination from the lawyer and the accountant.
And
One problem at a time.
and it sounds like
Multiple problems at a
for
time.
continued repairs, if there's things going wrong, is there any kind of like reserve, or are we gonna keep borrowing from water or elsewhere to cover these things?
All good questions. And that's part of the future planning that we, the village, and those who operate the plant will do.
Because that should have been part of this planning, like for this past expansion. So, it just seems like it's living paycheck to paycheck to keep this thing afloat.
So the original documents that led to the system that we have are all available on the website, and you can look at the estimates and the assumptions that were made that got us to where we are. So there was an assumption that we were fully covering the costs, and that appears not to be the case.
So, the concerns about the expansion have a few factors. One is the environmental impact. Another is flooding and things like that. But another is the fact that you'll have so many new customers on the system and have a very, very large increase in the flow going to this plant. And given that there have been ongoing issues now for years beyond the discharge, having a single point of failure in the middle of an urban area is very concerning, obviously, the folks that live around. And so, you know, we're not saying stop running this plant and don't let those 100 and something people have sewer, but we would like the expanded plant to be at a different location.
I understand. You've made that clear, and you know, and again, I think the opportunity is to work with people who are experts in this business, who have made sewer plants and run them, and are engineers and training, and that's the process.
So a question I have for Robert is, you know, some of the customers are, the proposed customers are things like the schools, which are could be big customers with potentially not great septic habits. What are the types of what types of things would be in place to ensure that if students are flushing lots of things, like are those getting held on the school property and then just the discharge is coming to this plant, or
Well, I guess nothing's been finalized. It's whether the expansion would be just like the original, or whether it's a septic tank and pumps, or a combination of conventional gravity with pump stations.
okay.
So if it's conventional gravity with pump stations, then everything would come and get pumped.
What's the current
What's the
plan?
current plan? Yeah.
So what's on paper right now is continue with the step. But,
Which means that everything would go into the septic tank, and it's
Yeah.
just the liquid that gets pumped.
Thank you. That was my question.
And has anything been communicated with the school? Because it sounds like from their board meetings, they're really unsure about what to do with their athletic fields because, you know, they're not sure how expansion things are happening.
We've actually met with the facilities, with the facilities committee. Robert's been in touch with the engineer who's working on that.
we gave them a
on the
concept
building.
plan of how we would run their sewer pipes through the school.
Yeah, so we've definitely been in touch. I think the issue ultimately is timing, in terms of what they're trying to do and how, you know, this process is a long one. So we certainly can't say with any definitiveness what our timing might be. And obviously there are lots of checkpoints along the way and decision points. So it's not a done deal, but it's part of the process.
And you had also mentioned that there was some either subsurface or testing of the aquifer prior to this last expansion, which you had said did show some contamination possibly from local septic failures. So I know you said you would provide that report, so I thank you for that. I had also asked if one of those tests could be done now to see if the plant is also contributing to contamination issues, or, you know, if things have gotten better or worse in that area. So would there be a possibility to have testing like that done as soon as possible, just to know what we're looking at?
So that testing involved, I don't know if you had a chance to see the results of that report?
No, I haven't seen
Yeah,
anything
so
yet.
it's incorporated into the report to the first wastewater plant.
Mhm.
It's also attached as an appendix to the current report. But basically, several sampling wells were installed throughout the village. Samples were collected from those wells. But those sampling wells were temporary. And like one was here at Village Hall. I don't know how many of those still survive. It's been
But also,
Practically 10 years
the aquifer flows this way. Correct me when I say something wrong, but it flows roughly this way. And there were test wells that were done, as I recall, it was 3 on that side, effectively, of the main area, and 3 on the other side. And so it was testing what was added to the flow from that side to that side. And our wells are over there, so that's sort of where.
Yeah, you could see a very dramatic difference in ammonia, especially ammonia is one that showed up a lot, and the west side of Route 9. Right.
So I'm not sure that that type of test would be the one that's getting at what you're asking. I do think, and I think it was Dr. Chris Solomon, who was at our last meeting, who shared that the discharge is something that will dissipate. He said, you know, he said a month or a year, it should all be dissipated. So one of the questions, I mean, from my standpoint, I'd like to get to full compliance in what our discharge is and have a couple months that go by and then do some testing and see how we're doing. But I think it goes back to the question of what are the right tests to get at the question of what is the health. And obviously from the Sawkill watershed community, there's the testing site that they have is, so we're discharging into a sub-tributary, and that then joins a tributary, and it's after that point when the Sawkill watershed is doing the testing. And so I don't know enough to know. I know that location is, has worse results than other locations around the Sawkill watershed. And so understanding what are those differences, what might be causing those differences. You know, so I think having some experts join us and really put together a plan, because I think the other, we have a wetland, and a wetland is a really valuable thing to have. And what can we do to enhance the health of that wetland, I think is a really important thing that we can do going forward. And I think that's very much something we can do in conjunction with the town, and get some grants to do it right. Because I think the most important thing is to make those wetlands as healthy as possible. Because it's not just it's not just for the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant, but it's also for when there's extra water, it can hold that. And there are other things that discharge into that area, and so with a really good, healthy wetland, we're all better off.
The other things that discharge are natural.
The other things that discharge are water, but for example, the drainage on Route 9 over here by Garden Street, it actually goes into a pipe that goes out and actually discharges behind UBS before our discharge. UBS had blocked it off, and they, I want to say 6 months ago, I don't know if you've noticed, Garden Street doesn't flood quite like it used to when there's a big amount of water. It all does dissipate over time, slowly, but by having cleared that out at UBS, which means it goes that much quicker over to what used to be called Mazinos Pond. I mean, there actually is a pond back there. So that's one of the things that discharge in there. So it's water from the road, so it's going to have salt in it from the winter and whatever. There's also the storm drains from Red Hook Estates. There are actually 2 discharges that come from that enter from the other side, and then the bigger tributary that goes through a farm. And Tradition has some form of wastewater treatment plant. I don't think it's a big.
They don't
discharge
release into the
directly.
They don't
Doesn't go
release into the
directly into-
tributary. They're pumped out. It's like a subsurface storage thing that's pumped out.
But you just have to remember that subsurface doesn't mean it goes nowhere, right? Pops. Subsurface, that's why, you know, we had to put in the wastewater plant here, because all the cluster of substandard and failing septic systems in the village led to the high level of nitrogen in the groundwater, right? So just because you treat it and put it in the ground doesn't mean it goes away.
Yeah, but I think they're stored. It's a stored thing that's pumped out, and they've been in compliance the whole time, so they haven't had any issues
Yeah,
with their
I'm not saying
testing.
that they're not in compliance, but
It's just another,
Mhm.
it's up that, and actually the tributary goes in a different direction than I thought it did when I finally looked at it. Anyway, it is not only the wastewater treatment plant that contributes to that sub-tributary.
Who would be able to contribute knowledge on where the wells are for that testing that was done before, to see if there are, like, still west of Route 9 or elsewhere that's still available? And who could weigh in on what should be done with that? Is that like a Delaware?
Well, we know
engineering
where the wells would have been,
right.
but I'm not sure that you're concerned about the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant, correct?
Yeah.
And I mean, if we redid those wells, it would hopefully show that there's no difference now between those wells and these wells. But it doesn't, but the wastewater treatment plant's over there. So if what you want to see is what does it look like on the other side of the wastewater treatment plant,
I
we
want
need
both.
to test over there.
I want both. Like what I was asking for in my email was to have the same testing done again at the same sites as well as at the plant area location. So it would be like the ones that are still there, plus adding a new well to test somewhere near the.
So
plant
I
location.
think that I believe that the right way to go is to look at all the possibilities. All these things cost money, and I think we're going to ultimately need to prioritize. You know, what is the most important question? It would be nice to confirm that, having put in the sewer system, that we have done what we expect that we did, but I'm not sure that that really gets at what you're trying to get at least as I understand it, is to make sure that the wastewater treatment plant hasn't denigrated the area from the discharge and beyond. So I certainly take it into consideration. Not something that I'm qualified to say what is the right thing, but that's also why I think we need to spend some time and we need to think about it, and we need to get some input, and then go forward from there.
And who would give that input?
Part of the process is to figure out who the right people would be.
So, some of us here, we bore the brunt of this whole mismanagement of the existing plant. And as you've been going through the process of trying to fix it, we've been having to live with it the whole time. And I understand you're coming to the point where we're getting past that. But when this thing goes to 300,000 gallons, are we going to have to deal with the brunt of that again? Because essentially for the last several months, we've been told, kind of suck it up, we're working out, we're doing our best. We don't want to suck it up.
We're all done.
We don't want to suck it up anymore.
I know.
And especially when you go to 300,000 gallons, now how much harder is it going to be to fix it then? Because at that point, there are going to be people who need to get rid of their discharge, and it's going to come to those of us on Smith Street and along that discharge line who've got to just suck it up.
And does it
And
make
we don't want to do
sense?
that.
Does it make sense to take it from like Cookingham East, which is a much more rural location, and put it right here in the middle of this dense village? Like, is that logical?
It was a brownfield. It was a site that was.
It's still a home of a lot of people now.
No,
It's
I
not,
understand. I understand.
it's not a super fun site. This is a home.
was.
This is a community.
But it was remediated, so that doesn't mean like, let's just pile on, because it's, you know.
So I totally understand your concerns. I understand your point of view. I totally get it. As I say, having just gone back through the order complaints, I can't imagine. It's just.
But
awful.
also, is that like the
But-
done thing worldwide, to take sewage from rural areas and concentrate it in more densely populated areas?
It's in the middle of the village. It's not an unusual thing to do. Well, I shouldn't say that. You're the.
I mean, it's not like that in
Well,
Woodstock.
it's-
It's not like that in
I mean, you
many
know,
places.
We are at a pretty small scale here, right? But yet, villages only have one wastewater plant, right? Most cities only have one wastewater plant. It has to be pretty large an area to have multiple.
And does it usually discharge into a site with more flow versus this tiny creek that barely flows, and half the time it dries up, and we're told that the odor complaints could be due to drought and decaying vegetation?
Let me just share, having just read through all of that, that was a terrible response, and I apologize. I was desperately trying to figure out why the smells were, and that was a terrible response, and
Well, thank
no
you.
basis in fact, and I apologize.
Is there going to be something in the operational procedures for an expanded plant that says, hey, if we start to exceed our speedies and we start to come out of compliance, that would say there's some type of plan that can be done to reduce the burden on the plant while it gets fixed? Or is it again going to be, hey, you guys, we know we're not in compliance, you guys got to suck it up until we fix it?
And
I
in the
mean, there's
meantime, we're
gotta be
going to raise
some
your
way
taxes.
operationally that you
Right.
can.
If I could just kind of turn the clock back a little bit, right? So like when we came on board at the plant, you know, in April or whatever, at beginning of, end of May,
March.
end of March, right? The place looked like nobody had been there in like a long time, right? So
That's
I mean,
great news.
So the operator like totally screwed us, right?
Mhm.
It's like, I have some problems with the design and other things, but the place was not operated the way it should be, which is why you ended up with the odor concerns, right? So,
And I think part of our concern is, unless we keep our eye on that ball, what's to make sure it doesn't happen again?
well,
And when it's happened again already, it's too late for us.
no, I get it, but it's.
And that
it's-
tributary doesn't support this quantity of water. Like, where is the evidence that it can support 300,000 gallons a day?
Especially our property. on the
I
corner
mean,
of it
hence
all.
the need for
Mom's
the
gone.
environmental impact
Right, those
statement.
properties half gone.
Right.
Yes, so
Getting
I get it,
This is
but
probably
I
a
can
good
tell you it's not
time.
gonna, what happened, you know,
That's a
6
lot of
months ago,
water.
will never happen here again.
This is
That's
the
great that you
discharge
feel that way, but you
And that's
can't- your word is great,
75,000
but
a
it
day?
doesn't help me.
That would be 50,000 because we're not at 75, because we're not at full capacity.
Okay, so
That's
6
what it
times
looks
that.
like, slow and steady. So, yeah.
Yeah,
obviously it
but
would
the
be
problem
more,
is
but
when
it's-
you add all the water, what's that, Cambridge?
Oh, the stormwater.
The stormwater, then the water coming down the street, and then you're adding that. It isn't just one thing, it's
Right.
3 things that's pounding my property.
And
I keep saying I'm getting washed away.
And that's gonna be multiplied by 6.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gonna be multiplied by 6 plus all the,
I mean, I took the video just so
Yeah.
that you could have a visualization of what 50,000 gallons a day looks like.
But 6
You
times
make it look
that
like
is
a
gonna be
babbling brook,
lot
but we
more.
know
Could be
the
more,
truth.
sure.
Is it gonna fit through that pipe?
No.
It would be a bigger pipe.
How
it'll be
big?
a bigger pipe.
So
Well,
that'll
I
be
think
a-
that's
You're gonna need a
8,
bigger
so it'd be 12 or 15.
That's right.
Is there a way to put like a rock embankment to keep the water trained into a certain location so that it doesn't, or piped underground, like, you know,
Yeah, why not pipe it to a
So
more
that it-
flowing water source?
right.
So, I mean, yeah, we're gonna evaluate whatever
To the
options,
Hudson.
you know, they direct us to, but there is such a thing as like pump it half a mile away or a mile away, people do that, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're proposing to do with it from Cooking Camp to here, though, is pump it.
Well, yeah, you collect it all in one central place, you treat it, and then you get rid of it, right? But it's all, you know, balance of treatment and cost, right?
I think we're seeing the environmental cost and the cost to the community is extensive.
So we're obviously not going to solve the issue. This is an ongoing project. There's a lot of things to review. And it certainly starts with operating, having the discharge be what you're seeing there, which is clean. It's not 100% compliance.
Do you guys have estimates on the maintenance and repair costs of the fully expanded
We
facility?
do, we do, but again,
Is that
they're
going to be
back of
funds
the,
that
they're
are
back of the,
committed
back
in the
of
budget? Like, is that going to be funds that are committed in
Yep.
advance to the budget?
Mhm.
So that when things get tight in Red Hook, one of the places that doesn't get cut is the plant, because I don't know why that plant wasn't maintained properly. I don't know if it was a lack of oversight or a lack of funds or both. But once money starts getting tight, that's when people start cutting back on maintenance. And then that's when it becomes our problem.
So the current plan for the expansion is different technology, slightly different
We keep hearing
technology,
that.
correct?
Well, it has
No,
to
it's
be,
the
right?
same.
Because if you're gonna do more in the same spot, it's gotta be different technology, right?
Just want to know the maintenance dollars are going to be committed. And we
So as-
understand what that is before it gets done.
As we go through the process, you will have an opportunity to look at all of those details.
You did.
And that's part of the process, is there's the initial sort of framing of the project. And it's with that you can apply for grants, because obviously the more grants you have, the less, the more, again, that pays for a portion of the construction part. And then after that, when you get the grant, is when you are able to start doing the further, deeper engineering, the more reviews, et cetera. And so that would be the other reason to keep going with the grants, so that we can get the money to do the reviews and the environmental assessments and all that.
But the grants are one-time deals, right?
Sure.
That's gonna-
No, and you're worried about the ongoing maintenance, and I totally get it.
I've managed a number of properties where the owners bought a Maserati
No,
and
yeah.
then they wanted the maintenance plan of a VW. And
Yeah.
that's what we got a little concerned about, that,
Sure.
you don't understand what the maintenance costs are gonna be, and then when the bill comes due, we're not ready.
And the concerns with moving forward with the grants without doing the environmental assessment up front and a full fiscal plan for just these types of situations is that once you have a grant, you're kind of locked into this being the solution. As a former planning board member said, like at a couple meetings ago, once you have a grant, there's a lot of pressure. I mean, there's already 20 years of pressure on this being the site. And so rather than assessing and reassessing other options, it's being moved forward as though this is the only option.
It seems like you beat up that land just about as much as it can get beat up back there. And you're gonna beat it up more.
And isn't it supposed to be undisturbed with the arsenic?
Yes.
Well, that's, I mean, again, that would be the role of the DEC remediation team. And they came and did a physical walkthrough. We actually walked back to, they went to the discharge pipe, they walked along the back, they walked along the whole section. They didn't go behind.
They didn't walk
Pat's
to where
house.
the drums were that I sent them pictures of, and I told them about it afterwards before they sent the report. And they didn't come back to look at that area.
Yeah, there are a
But
couple
they
of
have-
drums that are out in that area.
They have your pictures, they had them with them, and they obviously looked at them, they knew, and they wrote their report. You're welcome to, write
No,
back to them.
I
I know, and I think that's the whole problem
think
though,
that-
is that everyone we ask is sort of like, well, that's not my area, and we keep getting deflected around to other things. And, thinking from a long-term perspective, like, if there's another mayor in like, so many years, what happens then? Are we gonna go through this all over again? Anyone could be mayor, like someone in this room could even be mayor.
Absolutely.
None of us are sewer
If
operators,
you live in the village, though.
nor are we,
Right.
supposed to be managing these types of things. So it just seems like it's a model that's not really sustainable for a small municipality to be running. So is there any other condition besides not being able to run this current one that would make you consider either having the county run it or moving the expansion somewhere else? Because I really feel like there's got to be another alternative than just saying if we can't run this one.
A couple things. One, if the county runs it, you can't hold me accountable. You're gonna have to hold the county accountable. And Jake's not gonna come in 5 minutes when you call. So
Which is fine, because I probably won't need to, because they have a lot more resources to manage these
you
things.
do know that what they do is hire an operator and they operate the plant. So it's the same concept, they just hire the operator and the village does it.
Yeah, but
So-
they make sure that their people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like, they manage the traditions one, and they haven't had any issues.
True, that's true. They manage others.
Or
not
Tivoli, is it
necessarily
working
us.
in Tivoli, do we know?
I
Yeah,
mean,
they're
it
managing
is certainly,
Tivoli
it
now.
is certainly an option. And it's something that as I've already said, we'll certainly look into it.
Why do you think it's a
We'll
bad
look into
idea to have the county do it?
I do.
Why?
Why do you think it's a bad idea?
Why do I think it's a bad idea? I think that with all that we have now been through, me and the engineer and our DPW foreman, I would say that this is not going to happen again.
But what if you're not reelected and the new team comes in without your experience?
You can always change the operator to the county.
After the damage is done again.
Why would you wait for the damage? I mean, this moment is, as I say, this has been a terrible period of time. I totally understand that. I mean, there are sewer plants all over the country, and there are ups and downs. I've spoken with the mayor of the village of Rhinebeck. Village of Rhinebeck, it's actually their own employees who run the plant. They get them certified and they run their own plant. They've had similar issues where it was not being managed well. They had to remove their operator. They brought in a new one. It's not a unique thing to the village of Red Hook, but it is something that we need to be on top of. And it also means, unfortunately, that when you hire an expert whose job it is to operate a plant, because that's what they're trained to do, and also it's the job of the DEC to oversee that, there are a lot of things that came arguably the perfect storm in this particular situation. And that's really unfortunate. I guess what I'm asking is that we continue this conversation. And from a month ago, we've made significant progress. And I think a month from now, we will have some.
Is the new plant going to come on in steps, or is it going to be 300,000 gallons all at once? Are you going to bring portions of it online in steps that we could say, okay, after you brought on another 20,000 gallons, here's what the effect is downstream. Okay, we're good. Let's go with another 10,000 gallons. Okay, we're good. Or is it going to be
Well, I think the question about the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant, at 300,000 gallons a day, there's a certain quantity that will come out. And the idea is that it will be slow and steady. Slow is probably not the wrong word, but it will be a steady flow. And if it's determined that that's too much for the subtributary that's there, then we shouldn't be authorized to discharge 300,000. So I think the decision for that happens before the construction starts.
Okay, so then it sounds like if the decision is made to do it, then once it turns on, it's at full flow. We're not gonna do this in a step type, gradual,
Well,
a
it
piece
depends.
at a time.
You've committed a certain number of people to connect to the sewer, right?
Mhm.
So you're obligated to provide sewer service to them.
That's
Why
back to the
can't we
fiscal
do that in
issue.
steps? Why can't we do that in pieces instead of?
Well, we're not going to go from 0 to 300, immediately, and I don't believe that we will. I don't remember what the number is, but the plan is not to connect people who will get us to 300 at this point. The idea is to have some excess capacity.
Right.
So from the beginning, you're not flowing at full speed. And depending on what you mean by time, the construction project, we're not going to be doing all the areas all at once. So there
So there
will
will
be.
be monitoring going throughout.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so then if we have an issue, then will you guys stop?
When you fix it, right?
There was some mistakes made in them the first time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who
For
made
sure.
the mistakes? I mean, everybody keeps pointing and saying it's this one and that one, and then I remember you saying that, it doesn't take a lot to be mayor, you gotta live in town.
And be 18.
Yeah,
We actually have to live in the village.
right, live in a village, I'm sorry, live in a village,
Be
and,
18 and be a
US
citizen. That's correct.
yeah, so,
And get one more vote than the other guy,
right,
the judge pointed out.
right. So, yeah, I'm just kind of wondering it's a big project.
That's why you hire people to do the project. So,
Okay. But the first person that got hired, that was a mistake,
well, you hire a variety of people. I mean, you have the operator is obviously key. And for the construction project, that's why you hire engineers to develop the project. That's why you go out to bid and you hire folks who do construction. We actually had there was an engineer who was on site for the entire project.
in your Daily Catch interview before you became mayor, you said you used to manage construction projects,
I worked for a construction company.
and you were excited and looking forward to managing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Not operating, I was looking forward to the construction project.
but there were mistakes made in construction and design.
Well, the design, there, I would say that it wasn't I don't think it would be fair to say there was a huge design problem. There were design issues here and there. The plant doesn't have a lot of, how did you put it? It doesn't have a lot of margin for error. So we're having to find out what is that margin for error and manage to it. Yeah, as I say, I think there's a surprising number of things that all seem to happen on this one project.
I would
And
say
has there
that the
been-
pumps were oversized and it blew the enzymes out, whenever, that was kind of a big mistake. And one that really is
Kept
basic
happening.
engineering that they should have. So I'm a little skeptical about the commissioning process that took place at that point. It doesn't sound like it was a very well thought out or executed plan. I mean, pumps that are oversized and blowing out the enzymes.
So I guess
Come on.
what I'd like to say is, as you might imagine, we have some of the same questions. To me, the most important thing was to get the operations of our plants correct. That to me was the number one priority. Once we are fully there, then the question is, what happened? How did we get here? And I think that, there's a word, but basically going back and figuring out how we got here, which is one of the reasons why I did the lab report chart, because I said, why did it get to where it was? And I don't, what I saw was that the reports that we got did not give us an indication until the end of 2024. And so I think we have further investigation to do, and that's going to take some time.
Will you guys commit to sharing commission reports as you get the other plant online?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Will you
I
be
don't-
seeking compensation from anyone you find responsible, so taxpayers don't have to continue to foot the bill
So just to
for
be clear,
repairs?
it's, yeah, I mean, technically the sewer project is being paid for by the people who use the sewer system. The capital project is part of the fee that people are paying, those who are on the sewer system. I recognize that some of the water fund is going to fund that, just recognize that the water fund is also not taxes, it's actually a use fee. So just to clarify that piece. If there's an appropriate, I mean, that's why the investigation becomes important. If it becomes clear that there's a reason to consider that, we will absolutely consider that. But I don't have any evidence at this point that we have that.
You were looking at getting funds for like correcting the environmental issues. Erosion is my problem in my area. Are we getting any funds for that?
So that's part of the discussion that we're having is what is it that we want to do? And then when we have kind of a better idea of what the plan would be, it would be then to apply for grants. There are quite a few that are available. You just
Yeah.
have to have a project.
Soil
that's kind of-
testing might be.
And that, and that could easily be part of it. I think that's, I think
I
that's
mean, is
part
there
of
a
the
chance
discussion.
that you're gonna like backfill my property a little bit where it's all washing away?
So to be honest, I actually looked at parcel access and there are historical photos. And, and again, it's certainly not precise by any stretch, but that stream goes through, a major portion of that sub-tributary goes through and always has gone through your property.
Yeah.
So it's not obvious from the aerials that there's a significant difference because there's a section of your property that's just always been that stream. So, I think, again, this is why we need to take some time, we need to look at it. You mentioned erosion.
Yeah,
DEC didn't see
I was even
erosion.
shocked.
So,
Yeah,
that
so, and maybe I don't understand what erosion means, and so we're not, again, this is not my expertise, but that's why I think it's appropriate to come up with a plan and understand what we put into that plan, and then, in conjunction with the town, because it eventually goes into the larger tributaries in the town, and obviously the Sauk is mostly in the town.
I would think that a surveyor could put stakes in and put a baseline with a surveyor, with stakes on Ron's land, and monitor it over 6 months and see if there's any change like that. And it seems like a pretty cost-effective way to do that. And you can do a baseline
just
survey now
the other
and
piece,
see where it goes.
yeah,
in
just
6 months.
just to be clear, from as mayor, there are village laws that I need to make sure that I follow, and so if I do something for one individual property, it has to be for a public good. And so I just need to make sure that I'm following the appropriate paths, which is why taking the time to figure out what the right thing is the
I
thing to
think
do.
the public would probably agree if Ron's land's being eroded, it's in the public good to find out.
And that's why we have legal representation, to understand that we have to, because if Ron asks for that, why wouldn't you ask for that? And
I want my
folks-
soil samples.
There you go, so.
Don't
So I
bring me
think
your
that's,
tomatoes and green beans, by the way.
I can't wait, I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
not a question, but a statement. I mean, your pushback against the county managing it is basically that, larger government managing it means less oversight and less accountability. And,
More cost.
more cost.
Mhm.
And so across the, in general, what we've seen from this is a lot of people punting things back and forth. And so even when the DEC comes back with a report like that, what I guess, how do I organize this? We have talked to many ecological experts about this site, about the types of assessment that should be done, et cetera. The DEC report was quite lackluster to me, honestly. It seems like they're kind of covering their asses. When we mention erosion, it's not just erosion on Ron's property, it's also erosion of the slopes coming off of Red Hook Estates. A lot of these things are at a legal level and maybe a zoning level, or whatever the right word is
Can
for
I just add, because I'm sure that you know a lot more than I do. Erosion off the slopes from Red Hook Estates.
So, yeah.
Shouldn't have anything to do with the discharge from the wastewater treatment.
So this is exactly my point though. So a lot of these things are being legally separated, right? As this is the discharge, et cetera. So
we need to make sure that the discharge is proper. Happy to talk about erosion, but it's hard for me when it feels like there's a conflation of the erosion is being caused by the discharge, and that one I can't visualize.
Can you let me finish?
Yes.
So at this site, we have a long history of pollution going back to the 60s. We have contamination, we have the septic plant, the discharge, the odor, and we have stormwater runoff from neighboring developments and areas. And all of these things are coming into this one area with a small number of neighbors that live around it who are getting really, really deeply impacted. So having the village manage it, one of the benefits for us as a community should be that the village is looking at this comprehensively, not just saying that the only thing we own here is the wastewater treatment plant. That instead, what's happening to this wetland area and all the neighbors around it are also things like stormwater increases coming out of those pipes and hitting those slopes, changing the grade of those slopes. So when they say they're not seeing erosion, first of all, they have no point of reference for what that site looked like like 5 years ago. And second of all, they weren't looking at the places because they didn't actually contact us who wrote into them that we're concerned about. So we're concerned about not just the area where the effluent is coming from, we're concerned about that whole system that's there. And so the banks that are right off of Red Oak Estates, all of this is related. And so even though the wastewater treatment plant is the only thing that the village is managing, as a village, if you're the ones who have the more accountability, more oversight, we're supporting you keeping this plant by not going and pressing the county to take it over.
Welcome to.
And no, because what we'd like to do, and what we've been saying all along, is collaborate, but we want things looked at holistically and not just like, this is in my purview, that's someone else. Like, so tired of that. And that's coming from the DEC too. So like when I read that DEC report, I don't say, wow, this is all great. I say, what is the DEC not looking at and why? And like, I'm just, again, like begging you to kind of look beyond just the wastewater treatment plant as you're looking at this whole system, and look beyond caring about, your effluent is the thing that's okay right now, because this whole system has been degraded. And again, it's a few of us showing up over and over again in this room but those people are really massively impacted. So again, it's not just the effluent, it's not just the odor, it is all of these things. It is a hot mess, but it needs to be looked at as a whole. So if the village is managing this, we hope that accountability and oversight will be taken more holistically.
And the best answer I can give you is it's hard to manage everything all at once. And so I think the most important thing from January until now is that we focused on the effluent to make sure that is corrected. Whether we look holistically or not, that had to be fixed. And the next step, which we've talked about, and I completely support, is looking at the whole thing holistically. The part that's hard is when it all gets conflated and it all feels like, well, it's because of the effluent, because it wasn't managed properly. And so I ask both ourselves and also you to say, let's separate the one thing from the big thing. And the big thing, I think, is the opportunity to work with the town. They have a lot of experience. Robert has a lot of experience of applying for these kinds of grants. I think this is a perfect opportunity to look at this whole space. There's a portion of it that is in private property, and so there are laws associated with that. I appreciate the fact that you don't find that the DEC's response is holistic. However, their job is to look at the section of the site that they have an easement over.
Yeah.
And that may not be the answer that you want, but that's the job that they had, and that's what they came to look at.
So as you move forward with this process, beyond relying on the DEC to tell us if we need to put signs, the DEC to look at this one section, right? The DEC has so many different, we've had to email like 30 different people to get people in the right different departments. you know, the benefit of having the village manage this and monitor this site is that you're really familiar with this area and that you care about the community. And as you move forward with this process, not just relying on an operator to know it, to be doing the good job, not relying on the DEC to be providing the level of oversight. Like a municipality can have higher standards than a lot of these other organizations. And we're asking for a lot higher standards. And one of the concerns with moving forward with grants on this is the momentum that grants bring. So again, if along the way, it's like, wow, this whole system, not just because of the effluent and the increasing discharge, but like, I think a survey would be great to start to have because of the huge amounts of rain we're having, right? Like all of that coming out and pressing into the system, like if we have a bunch of grants to support an expansion, it's going to be really hard to backtrack from that. And so hearing that you are, you know, applying for grants or doing income surveys to support grant applications and stuff, while we are still deeply concerned that this site is not the appropriate location, and this feeling that once there's a grant in hand, there's no going back, there's no assessing other locations. It's like this, you know, it's the plant has to run because the plant has to run. Like that's not the answer that we want. And so taking a more stringent approach, because we are this small municipality managing our own wastewater treatment plant, we want a more stringent, like much higher standards than what the DEC's level of like, you know, compliance or requirements are. Not this like, you know, massive government, like the line is here, the boundary between the village and the town is here. Like water doesn't know where the boundary is. And so just again, a plea for looking at this as a whole. There are many, many different factors at play here, and concern that as you move forward with grants, there is no stopping the train that is going forward, and it already has years worth of history of pressure on this one site.
I hear you, and I thank you for sharing. I don't have anything else for tonight. Actually, the only thing I did have was the next meeting. The 4 weeks from now is July 3rd, and I'm not available. Actually, I had some dates. And I don't think 3 weeks from now is, I'd like to have a few weeks of sample results to share. So I just wanted to throw out either Thursday, July 10th would have to be at 4 p.m. or Tuesday, July 15th at 7. Anybody have any thoughts on either of those? Anybody care?
15th at 7.
7 p.m.
Okay, 15th,
Wait,
that's a
sorry,
Tuesday.
15th at 7.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That is what it will be. And obviously you know how to reach me. Please reach out. I will say that we are very grateful that you continue to share with us. I know it's also that what you're smelling, what's happening, and I don't think I put that in here, but in May we had 3 instances. One of them, 2 people told us about, and we know exactly about 2 of them. There was a third one that was a little confusing. It was that we're not quite sure what happened there, but it seemed to have dissipated. So we are hoping that, especially as the summer comes and it's really hot, and that folks want to be outside, we hope that we've really turned that corner. So please do let us know, and we appreciate the feedback. And I will just say a big thank you to Jake. I understand that he's very responsive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He does.
Question.
We are very fortunate as a village to have Jake Smith as our DPW. And we'll see you in July. Thank you very much.